It is known as the Stone House in the Canyon. The prospectors and men of wild habits who went up and down the Gulch Trail, their back stairs to the mine and the mountain pastures, named it so, and wondered what we were doing there or what we came to do.
One of my favorite things about Boise is that we're surrounded by so much Wild West history, all of it within an hour of any direction. So I'm really excited that we're chatting today with author Stacy Gwill about Foote Park and the people who made Boise and the waterways come through town. Thanks for joining us, Stacy.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're talking about a location that's fascinating historical park in the Treasure Valley. It's just a few minutes from Boise, just below Lucky Peak Dam, and I like to hang out there with my dog once in a while. And you know, historically, two things could make a large city in the Wild West. It seems like it was gold and water, right?
Right.
While one man struggled to engineer the waterways here, his not-so-behind-the-scenes wife helped support their family with these illustrations to famous authors and publications while raising a family on the Boise River near what is now Lucky Peak. People drive by this all the time, and I just don't think most people know about it.
I don't think they do. We're changing that.
Yes. And who were some of the people she did illustrations for to make this?
She did Nathaniel Hawthorne. She did incredible illustrations for the Scarlet Letter, Longfellow, that just comes to mind. They're just quite amazing.
Yeah, the Scarlet Letter illustrations. I haven't seen some of the other ones yet, but the lighting on some of those, just incredible.
And the detail.
Mm-hmm.
Extraordinary. She was known as the Dean of Women Illustrators.
In what year did Mary and Arthur Foote step off the train in CUNA to start this new life along the Boise River?
That would have been 1884.
I would like to know more about the book you wrote about it so people can get their hands on this. Tell us about the book, The Stone House in the Canyon.
The Stone House in the Canyon I began writing it maybe 5 years ago, but it represents probably 20 years of just digging into information. I learned about the Footes, and then someone said, you need to go up and see this house in the canyon where it was. And once I was up there, I was just amazed, overwhelmed with how rugged the canyon was and the idea that these folks lived out there and built this home. But then when I went to look for any information on it, it was all scattered all over, and I felt it was just a missing piece. So that's how the book got started.
I think it's such a big piece of Boise history, but why do you think most people don't know about it?
I'm not sure why, honestly. All that was up there before maybe 5 years ago was just the ruins and one small interpretive sign. Now, thanks to these two incredible women that did this grassroots effort, we do have this wonderful interpretive center. So it's beginning to get more and more notice. That was this incredible 5-year project to get it to honor both the Footes. I just feel like it is sort of a missing part of history that isn't honored quite enough, which another purpose of my book.
So let's set the scene for this. This is life before Lucky Peak. What decade was this, and what was life in general like for folks in Boise at that time?
They arrived in the 1883. By then, it wasn't even a state yet. The town was much smaller, of course, and mostly that was for supplying the mining industry that was around them, the mining camps. So it really wasn't a very big town. Most of the architecture was Victorian type, gingerbread homes. And Mary Hallock Foote, and when she first got there, she thought maybe it was a little lower class to her, but then she began to really embrace Idaho and the city of Boise.
So we keep in mind that there wasn't any TV yet, being this year that it was, and the first news radio broadcast didn't happen until 1920. So newspapers and magazines, this was kind of the only way that people got their news. And so many of Mary's illustrations of how people were living here made it to the east to get people sort of educated on what was happening here, right? What drew you really to the story of Mary Hallock Foote?
I was working on my PhD, and mostly of that was on Ernest Hemingway, but I wanted to expand a little bit what I was working on and started looking and found the Footes, the story of the Footes, and was so impressed with the contributions both of them made, both historically, economically, to this culturally to Boise. Then a friend of mine suggested I go up to this ruins up in the canyon, and I said, wait, what? Mm-hmm. And then went up there, and again, as I said, I was just so overwhelmed with the enormity of it and just drawn to the story. I think all homes have stories to tell, and I just knew that foundation with just that split rail fence around it, had a lot of stories to tell. And that's what then I became like a dog with a bone. I was going to find out more about it. And it was quite the journey to find all the different sources and put them all together. But it was very fun too, bringing all these stories in and making it tell a story. I mean, her story and his story and the house story.
And just to clarify, we're talking about a park that's across from Discovery Park on your way out of town, about 10 minutes from Boise. If you cross Lucky Peak Dam and go to the right, you can head down to Foote Park. It's Foote with an E, and you'll be able to see the ruins of what we're talking about and the park there. It's something people pass all the time driving to Idaho City or going up to the mountains to Stanley. Take 5 minutes and drive over there and check out what we're talking about, because it's really pretty amazing. So the Lytle Creek, or Little Creek, we're not sure how it's pronounced or how it's spelled, but what would you say it would be like a day in the life living there?
I think their average day would depend, of course, on the time of year, and also the backing that they had, financial backing, was always uneven. So that would always depend on what they were doing. For instance, when they lost a lot of the funding, her husband and the engineers were down working on new project inventions, and she called them the prisoners of hope as they waited. Then other times when things were really going well, I think it was probably a really dynamic place, because it was not only just Mary Hallock Foote and their children, but her sister, her brother-in-law, their children. They had the engineers there. They had a cook. I think it would have been a really fun place to be. I think they were all together, very close family, it appeared. And I think that I would have liked to visit. And they had visitors. Enjoy it.
I would love to, if you have a second, hear some of your favorite quotes that she has made about this experience.
I think one of the most famous ones before she arrived in Idaho and only knew about Idaho, the anticipation of coming to Idaho was, "Darkest Idaho, thousands of acres of desert empty of history." Also, then she goes on to say that no girl ever wanted less to go west with any man or paid a man greater compliment by doing so. The house itself is another fascinating architectural creation, because it really isn't anything like the homes that were there in Boise at all. It's very much Frank Lloyd Wright design before Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wow.
It was made from the materials right around the site.
It's like lava rock and basalt.
Yeah, the lava rock, and had these thick stone walls that were 2 feet thick to protect it from the heat in the summer and the cold in the winter. And it was very low to the ground. And they have a window there where they look right out towards the opening of the canyon towards Boise. They were very careful to have that window and the view that they wanted. And she writes this: "The V-shaped notch where the river went out and the sunset looked in bounded our world towards the valley. The bend in the river above us where the hills interlocked shut us off in that direction." So they felt like they were on their own little world.
If you think about it, there was no Lucky Peak, there was no bridge across the river.
Right.
So to get to this house, what did you have to do?
There were several ways. One of the ways that they tried to use the most was a boat. They would take it from the Boise, Idaho wagon road. They would take a boat from there and it go across. However, they named the boat the Irrigator, as I was mentioning to you, because it leaked a lot and they would get wet. But that was one way. And they would have horses then where their Lucky Peak would be where the stables were. And then they would take the boat across. There was also a very scary, she calls it, horse trail that hugged the bluffs, right against the bluffs on the south side. And then the other way was this very crude wagon road that went about a quarter mile south of the house and then went up through the drainage and up and hit the Oregon Trail. So that was the 3 ways to get to the house. The other thing they decided to do when they couldn't get across the river when it was frozen is they decided to build a suspension bridge, if you can believe it. And there's a picture of it in the book, and it is just, she talks about how terrifying.
You said there was just a handrail on one side.
It was a handrail only on one side, and it swayed when they walked across, and she was terrified of that. She would talk about at night. The sounds of the river would be the only sound she would hear, is that roar of the river. Her memoirs is a Victorian gentlewoman in the far west, and it is a wonderful book to read. Wonderful.
And then you have your book, We're Speaking with Stacy Gwill, the author of The Stone House in the Canyon. So if you're interested in this topic at all, definitely get those two books. And since we're talking about books, let's briefly touch on The Angle of Repose.
Angle of Repose, yes. Well, Wallace Stegner at some point decided that he wanted to take up the story. And he went back to the family and got some more information about them. And originally he told them he was going to write a biography of, and they were all for it. But somewhere along the line, Stegner felt that it would make a better novel than it would a story of Mary Hallock Foote. So he then began to write a story based on Mary Hallock Foote's life and Arthur's life. And it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1971. And it's very popular, but the problem that folks that know a lot about Mary Hallock Foote, and including her family, was that he sort of used her life pretty much verbatim, their whole story, but then kind of twisted her personality a bit to make her a much more harsh,
a very different character,
angry character. And then he did use a lot of her words. He said, well, her words were like, I saw them as broken rocks. I could make any kind of wall I wanted. And that's how he felt about it. I find that I miss less and less the art of the world and depend more and more on this wild, broad beauty that man has never touched. I hardly know how to keep a true balance between the two sides of the canyon existence, the life of dreams it fed in the beauty around us, and the grim attention it demanded every hour of the day to insistent realities. The children were never really safe without a grown-up eye upon them. There were the high places on all their walks. There were rattlesnakes lurking in the holes in the rocks. There was the wire bridge, a nightmare to mothers. There was always the river. Of all our wild nest building, this was the wildest and the most improvident and the hardest to leave.
Arthur Foote made plans for a system that could eventually irrigate almost 500,000 acres. He spent thousands of dollars to survey a 75-mile main canal and a grid of lateral ditches. However, a recession in the east dried up the capital. In 1909, nearly 3,000 spectators lined up to watch the water come out of the New York Canal at the Boise Diversion Dam. The Idaho Statesman published an article by D.W. Ross, Reclamation's chief engineer. Mary Hallock Foote recalled how her husband's broken work came to its accomplishment, with the government behind it. She pasted the clipping in her scrapbook and pondered, all we didn't do in Idaho.
Dreamers we are, dreamers we always will be. And what is folly and vain imaginings to some is the stuff our daily lives are made of. And there are thousands like us. If there never had been, there would be no Great West. If you could see this place, if you could live this life for a week, you would know what I mean. It is our fate to always be in these queer places, and I foresee the time when I shall long for them and be homesick for the waste of moonlight, the silence, the night wind, and the river. There is nothing that will ever quite take its place.
But now to Lido's Gulch hardly anybody goes. The stone house has crumbled at the angle of repose.